but each of these was equal to a battery of heavy artillery, such as I had known in the First World War. But when their fire was first concentrated on the Han city, they blew its outer walls and roof levels into a chaotic mass of wreckage before the nervous yellow engineers could turn on the ring of generators which surrounded the city with a vertical film of disintegrator rays. Our explosive rockets could not penetrate this film, for it disintegrated them instantly and harmlessly, as it did all other material substance with the sole exception of inertron, that synthetic element developed by the Americans from the subelectronic and ultronic orders. The continuous operation of the disintegrators destroyed the air and maintained a constant vacuum wherever they played, into which the surrounding air continuously rushed, naturally creating atmospheric disturbances after a time, which resulted in a local storm. This, however, ceased after a number of hours, when the flow of air toward the city became steady. The Hans suffered severely from atmospheric conditions inside their city at first, but later rearranged their disintegrator ring in a system of overlapping films that left diagonal openings through which the air rushed to them and through which their ships emerged to scout our positions. We shot down 7 of their cruisers before they realized the folly of floating individually over our invisible line. Their beams traced paths of destruction like scars across the countryside, but caught less than half a dozen of our gunners all told, for it takes a lot of time to sweep every square foot of a square mile with a beam whose cross-section is not more than 20 or 25 feet in diameter. Our gunners, completely concealed beneath the foliage of the forest, with weapons which did not reveal their position, as did the flashes and detonation of the 20th century artillery, hit their repeller rays with comparative ease. The drop ships, which the Hans next sent out, were harder to handle. Rising to immense heights behind the city's disintegrator wall, these tiny projectile-like craft slipped through the rifts in the cylinder of destruction, and then turning off their repeller rays, dropped at terrific speed until their small vanes were sufficient to support them as they volplaned in great circles, shooting back into the city defenses at a low level. The great speed of these craft made it almost impossible to register a direct hit against them with rocket guns, and they had no repeller rays at which we might shoot while they went over our lines. But by the same token, they were able to do little damage to us. So great was the speed of a drop ship that the only way in which it could use a disintegrator ray was from a fixed generator in the nose of the structure, as it dropped in a straight line toward its target. But since they could not sight the widely deployed individual gunners in our line, their scouting was just as ineffective as our attempts were to shoot them down. For more than a month the situation remained a deadlock, with the Hans locked up in their cities while we mobilized gunners and supplies. Had our stock of inertron been sufficiently great at this period, we could have ended the war quickly, with aircraft impervious to the dis-ray, but the production of inertron is a painfully slow process, involving the building up of this weightless element from ultronic vibrations through the subelectronic, electronic, and atomic states into molecular form. Our laboratories had barely begun production on a quantity basis, for we had just learned how to protect them from Han air raids, and it would be many months before the supply they had just started to manufacture would be finished. In the meantime, we had enough for a few aircraft, for jumping belts, and a small amount of armor. We Wyomings possessed one swooper completely sheathed with inertron and counterweighted with ultron. The Altoonas and the Lycomings also had one apiece, but a shielded swooper, while impervious to the dis-ray, was helpless against squadrons of Han aircraft, or the Hans developed the technique of playing their beams underneath the swooper in such a fashion as to suck it down flutteringly into the vacuum so created, until they brought it finally and more or less violently to earth. Ultimately, the Hans broke our blockade to a certain extent, when they resumed traffic between their cities in great convoys, protected by squadrons of cruisers in vertical formation, playing a continuous crossfire of disintegrator beams ahead of them and down on the sides in a most effective screen, so that it was very difficult for us to get a rocket through to the repeller rays. But we lined the scar paths beneath their air routes for miles at a stretch with concealed gunners, some of whom would, sooner or later, register hits, and it was seldom that a convoy made the trip between New York and Boston, Buffalo, Chicago, or Alana without losing several of its ships. Hans who reached the ground alive were never taken.